Today talk, let me introduce our speaker. So today we have guest of honor academic series, April webinar with Dr. Serdar Charyyev. He's a clinician assistant professor at Stanford University School of Medicine, specializing in therapeutic medical physics. Following his master and PhD degree at Georgia Tech University and residency in Emory University, he joined Stanford University. Currently, Dr. Charyyev is advancing proton therapy through clinical work at Stanford University. He's also a committee participant with American Association of Physics and Medicine, Particle Therapy Cooperative Group, and NRG Oncology. He's also a member of Turkmen American Scholar Association community. It's a very strong community of Turkmen in the United States. So his research mainly focused on proton mini-beams, hybrid semiconductor detection, and deep learning application in proton imaging. Yeah, please welcome Dr. Serdar Charyyev. Here, I'm stopping sharing my screen. Thank you. Serdar, do you have some?
Am I sharing my screen?
Yeah, you can try.
I'm sharing my screen. No, am I not sharing my screen?
No, we cannot see.
So probably you override my share. I was sharing, but let me try one more time.
Let me make you co-host.
It's fine. I was sharing. Let me try one more time.
Yep.
How about now?
Yep. It's loading. Yep, we can see and hear you.
All right.
And your slides as well.
Amazing. That's good. Yeah. So thank you very much. This was a good introduction and a needed introduction. So let me go back. My slides are not cooperating. So again, thank you for inviting me. I'm at early stage of my career, so it's an honor really to be here, considering there are probably more deserving speakers of this podium. The title of my talk today is From Physics to Patient Care and Novel Approaches in Proton Therapy. Probably not an indicative title for my slide deck because, very little I will talk about proton therapy. My kind of goals are to introduce myself, introduce medical physics, and introduce proton therapy. And I'll try to do that in the next 20-25 minutes. So my name is Serdar Charyyev. I'm a clinical assistant professor at Stanford University School of Medicine in the Department of Radiation Oncology. I'm from Turkmenistan originally. I grew up in a small town called Halach, here represented by the spin, and it's a home around to 8,000 to 10,000 people. Everyone knows everyone, not much interesting happening, but hey, we had a great childhood. We played all day, had so much fun. Ate what we find, where we find, collapse and fell asleep when and where our energy for that day runs out, right? And attendees here around my age and older can definitely relate to this. I did my undergraduate studies in Ankara. It's a capital of Turkey, in the physics department of Middle East Technical University. Then life took me to United States around 2008, 2009 timeframe. I remember it was during the financial crisis time. I left and come back, then I left and I come back again. This continued probably until mid-2010s when I settled in a graduate school. I did my PhD in medical physics at Georgia Tech, followed by a clinical residency at Emory University, Department of Radiation Oncology. And both of these institutions are in the city of Atlanta, the capital of the great state of Georgia. Upon completion of my residency, I joined the ranks of Stanford University School of Medicine. I'm serving there as a clinical assistant professor currently in the Department of Radiation Oncology. I'm in the Division of Medical Physics, and I'm a medical physicist. So I would like to do a little bit introduction to what medical physics is. I'm hoping that this is, helpful to a lot of, closely or maybe, have something overlapping with physicists and aspiring medical physicists. So therefore, please bear with me as I try to kind of promote medical physics as part of, being member of AAPM, PTCOG. Medical physicists are healthcare professionals that have training in medical applications of physics. And what does that involve? I'll try to give some keywords, right? X-rays, electrons, cancer, ultrasound, CT, protons, right? And PET-CT, PET, diagnostics, and therapy. So they are concerned with mainly three areas of activity. One is the clinical service and consultation. The second, and the research and development, and then they can be doing the teaching. So this time, their time may not be equally distributed. Depends on the type of position and primary discipline, and of course where you are employed, right? And I'll give a little bit of information more on that later. And as a medical physicist, you could be in one of these areas. You can be in radiation therapy, you could be in diagnostic imaging, nuclear medicine, and radiation protection. As far as the clinical service goes, if you are in radiation therapy, let's say, you will be involved in commissioning and calibrating the radiotherapy machines. You will be doing routine quality assurance to keep the machines within the tolerance that they were established at the time of commissioning. And medical physicists will review the plans developed by dosimetrists and verify that the treatment plans are safe and effective. The medical physicist can be called to contribute scientific and clinical advice and resources to solve a lot of problems that may arise continually in the cancer clinic. You might be in diagnostic and interventional radiology, then there you'll be dealing with areas of testing use, optimization, and quality assurance of the imaging devices, medical imaging devices. So these devices could be radiography devices, fluoroscopy, mammography, CT, ultrasound, MRI, what have you, right? And you could be in the nuclear medicine, and that's where you'll be involved with the quality assurance of, PET-CT, SPECT-CT. You might be preparing radiopharmaceutical for patient injection for nuke med imaging. You might also be in a radiation protection aspect of this profession, and there you'll be responsible for evaluating the safety procedures, radiation safety procedures, monitoring possible radiation exposure, or just ensuring that that radiation facility complies with the government regulations and radiation safety regulations, right? So what else medical physicists can do, right? They can, for example, be in a academic setting, right? And you might be, working as an instructor, training others. Often, they will have faculty appointment at universities, like myself, right? And you may be training future medical physicists, resident physicians, there are medical students, there are technologists, and so on. We could be part of the graduate program, be it a PhD program, a master's program, and you might be teaching in those programs too. We do a lot of research. Oftentimes, it's kind of a collaborative, cross-departmental, and multifaceted research. So it could probably deserve another seminar of its own. So for that reason, I'm not going to go deep into that. Medical physics is a very niche field. Last time I counted, there are 15,000 of us in the world. Kidding, I didn't count, definitely. This is just estimate, right? Estimate from, different societies of medical physics. Estimate around 15,000, so it's a very small, relatively, speaking, group. It's the only non-MD specialty of ABMS, American Board of Medical Specialties, that needs certification to practice in the United States. And well, at least it was, now I heard that there's another specialty. So that means you need to pass board exams, specifically American Board of Radiology, to practice medical physics in the hospital in the United States. So in terms of type of position, you have clinical and then non-clinical positions. As you can see, most of the medical physicists are clinical. I'm a clinical guy. Sorry. I'm a clinical guy. And when I say clinical, it does not mean I do not teach, right? Or I don't do research or admin work. It's just most of my time I spend doing clinical work. And what I mean by non-clinical, academic positions, mostly research positions and administrative positions, regulatory positions, and so on, right? And again, that's based on the share of time spent doing that work. In terms of the primary discipline, you can work as a physicist in radiation oncology, diagnostics, radiology, and others. As you can see, the majority of medical physicists work in radiation oncology. In terms of a primary employment, most of the time you work in the medical school, could be part of the university hospital. You can work in a private community hospital. That's about equal distribution between these two. Or you can be part of the medical physics service group, or you can work in the for industry, right? Industry, government, and others. So what is the education path, right, that leads to medical physics career? Let me try to explain with this kind of convoluted decision flow chart. Decision number one you have to make before, going to a graduate school is what degree you should pursue. And that will be a degree in physics most of the time, or degree that has physics courses in it. And after the completion of that undergraduate degree comes the graduate school. You can pursue an MP degree, medical physics degree. There's a lot of abbreviations here. Please bear with me. Or you can complete a PhD in a closely related field. And the definition of that closely related field is kind of broad, as long as it, has some science, engineering, and physics should work. Plus, after that completion of a related field, you complete the graduate certificate program. Now, any of these four choices could be CAMPEP accredited or not. And what is CAMPEP, right? And what is accredited? CAMPEP is the Commission on Accreditation of Medical Physics Education Program. It's a mouthful. It's a non-governmental commission that's sponsored by the relevant scientific and education and professional societies in our field. So they kind of oversee educational standards and certify that medical physics graduate or certificate or residency program has achieved those standards and are continuing to maintain those standards. So the graduate program that you enter here matters a lot because you can see it branches out from there. And let's say you are in a CAMPEP accredited program. Now you are eligible for ABR Part 1. What is ABR? What is Part 1, right? ABR stands for American Board of Radiology. It is one of those 24 national certifying boards of American Board of Medical Subspecialties. It oversees the board certification and ongoing professional development of physician specialties, mainly diagnostic radiology, interventional radiology, and radiation oncology, including medical physics. So you heard it right. ABR is the board that certifies medical physicists in the US. And ABR certification process consists of 3 exams called Part 1, 2, and 3 conveniently. Okay, so once you complete those graduate programs, you can enter and finish clinical residency. After completing the residency, you'll be eligible for Part 2 and 3. So once you pass those, you are now board certified ABR and eligible for positions that require board certification. So I hope your heads are not spinning. Mine was definitely when I first heard this. So, maybe enough of this boring slide. So let's change the topic. Look at the slide here. These are modalities and, modalities of radiology and imaging. So raise your hand if you had experience with these and heard about these. All right. How many people? Few people, fewer than I thought. All right. Well, probably people are shying out, but you see, these modalities, right? X-rays, CTs, like MRIs, are kind of inside like our life, right? I mean, you break your bone, you go and go in one of these imaging modalities, right? You have a baby, you're familiar with the ultrasound, right? You have some, I don't know, stroke, some issues, or your relative has some problems. This imaging modalities, everyone knows them. Most of the people know them or heard about them, right? So, and the reason is, most of these is for diagnostic purposes because, you just go, you might break a bone, as I said, you may have some other issue that's not related to being treated, right? So, when I say therapy and I'm in the therapy, right, we have some cancer treatment options. And out of these options, I'd like to point your attention to this radiation therapy, which is one of these many options, right? So in the radiation therapy, then just like we have these imaging machines, we also have therapy machines, right? So the radiation can be delivered from outside, we call it external radiation, or we can deliver it from inside. So then these isotopes are placed inside the body or cavity, and then they deliver the radiation from inside. And then this external radiation has multiple modalities, right? So they have these called MV X-rays, then we have electrons, we have, protons or ion therapy, and we have, image guidance. For example, I put MR-Linac. I mean, it's a MV X-ray accelerator, but has coupled with the MRI device so that we can see when we are treating, right? Basically. So not a lot of people are familiar with these machines because, we hope not to go into a cancer clinic, right? And, we don't want to be there, or we don't wish this to any of our, any person, right? But the reality of it is, there are a lot of cancer cases and happening every year. And, it's one of the leading causes of mortalities, unfortunately. So I'm going to focus on one of the modality here a little bit called ion therapy. And I'd like to introduce a little bit to what's called a proton therapy. So here, I try to show like an accelerator that can create these protons. This is cyclotrons or synchrotrons, and here I try to kind of show the difference between the conventional treatment, which is X-ray treatment. As you can see, there is a tumor in the brain, and we irradiate it with the X-rays, and X-rays kind of go through this. So the interaction mechanism with the medium is a little bit different than the proton. They have something called attenuation, meaning that they interact, but they don't stop. So they just deposit some of the energy and then pass. What that means for the tumor is behind the tumor, they will, of course, deposit some dose. And there might be some healthy tissues. In this case, it's a healthy brain that will get some unwanted radiation. Now we have another modality called proton therapy. It's a charged particle. Their interaction is a little bit different. So they have a certain range in a tissue. And it's such that, you can accelerate it to a certain energy and shoot it at a medium, and it will stop more or less where you want them to stop, plus minus some uncertainty, right? Which is in the order of the millimeters. So then what happens is then this is a very good quality of the protons. That means you can aim it such that, it will not go beyond, let's say, a defined margin of that tumor. So this becomes very, very valuable and can, kind of result in such dose distribution here. So I will try to show here a little bit of benefits of proton therapy, right? So you can see here, on this graph, there is a, try to compare the proton dose distribution with the X-rays dose distribution here. You can see that the protons have negligible dose deposition at the distal end of the tumor. And they're a little bit highly effective also in terms of biology. So they are more potent, about 10%, debatable, could be 15, 20% more potent than the X-rays. They have better ability to shape that dose. As you can see here in the middle image is something is being treated in the skull, right? And you can see that the dose distribution from the X-rays is kind of, you can see that cloud is a little bit more spilled in the surrounding tissue, whereas for the protons, it's kind of more conformal, right? So there's less integral dose. And it's very obvious from the next image. This image is craniospinal irradiation of a child with medulloblastoma. You can see on the left side, the x-rays are kind of exiting through the developing gut, right? They have a heart, lungs, and it's just going through. But on the right side, you have proton beam kind of restricted to the spine, something that you want to treat, and then there's no exiting dose. So these images kind of are poster child for protons and speak the case for protons. So how about the proton therapy access, right? So here's the nice work. I mean, I'm going to concentrate in the United States, but I'll show you what's the situation in the world. As you can see, we are residents in the Bay Area here in California, and in the Western US in general, we live in a proton desert, so to speak. We don't have a lot of proton therapy centers. Patients will have to travel, for our case, people living in the San Francisco Bay Area, at least 400 miles to the southern California, or about 800 miles to Utah or Seattle. So this is very ironic because the first patient in the world was treated with the proton here in the Northern California, in the Bay Area, just across the bay in a place called Lawrence Berkeley Lab, right? So it started there in 1954. So it's still interesting that we don't have a proton treatment here yet. And the global proton therapy access is even worse, right? So we have entire continents that they don't have access to proton therapy. As a result, only 1% of the patients undergoing radiotherapy worldwide receive proton therapy. The conservative estimates for that percentage is 15 to 50% of these patients could benefit from it. So anywhere from 1/5 of those patients to even half of those patients could benefit from it if they had it, right? But you can see the map is not very equal distribution, and we don't have anything in the Central Asia yet, right? And for that reason, there are initiatives about global democratization of this technology with the aim to make this accessible for more patients worldwide. So the question is, why is the proton therapy is not democratized, right? The proton therapy machines are huge, heavy, bulky, and costly equipment. So on the left here, you can see a single gantry proton room kind of can be compared to a London double-decker bus. So it's just the gantry itself is huge, right? A multi-room facility can occupy as large as a football field, just a whole block, costing in the order of $100 million, $200 million. There's nothing in medicine that costs, no medical device that costs as expensive as the proton accelerator. I mean, you can build a hospital, of course, for that money, but I'm talking about a single equipment. So the proton equipment is very expensive, very big, right? So for that reason, it's, only in, handful of countries and, handful of places. There are efforts to make this more compact. So there is a single room solution proton therapy. Still, they occupy a lot of space here. I compare it to a basketball court, right? There are even more compact cyclotrons that have gantries that don't make rotation, full rotation. Normally, they would be rotating 360 degrees around patient. They kind of, have, let's say, half of that, or 180 degrees or something like that, or 220 degrees. Still, they would need a 3-story building to have that gantry, even if it doesn't make full rotation, right? So it's a huge system. So then here at Stanford, we have some initiative happening right now. We're trying to make this proton system even more compact. We call it ultra compact, right? So much so that it can kind of fit into an existing linear accelerator room. So linear accelerator room for, comparison is just, 1/3 or 1/5 of those big rooms, right? And of course, this contributes to the global democratization of proton therapy, right? So that's the mindset at Stanford right now. And we're trying to bring the first in the world most compact proton therapy system in our clinic. So on the left side, you can see that this is just a sketch, right? The vision. And the right side, that vision is now realized. We received the system last January, and now the installation is complete with the initial clinical commissioning ongoing, and we are hoping to treat next month. So this is kind of my clinical project at Stanford. So a little bit about the anatomy of the system, right? So you can see that, it has these pillars, and on this pillar sits the CT system. So the CT system, normally the ones that we used to is like kind of the bore is like on the vertical axis, right? So you go in and out, the Z dimension is like horizontal, right? But for now, this system sits on a pillar and the CT goes up and down instead of patient going in and out of the CT bore. So that's an interesting system. So in that sense, patient is sitting and holding on to this backrest on the chair, and the CT goes and takes the image. Once we have that image, you can see that there is a cyclotron, very compact cyclotron behind the patient that provides the proton beam, and then we can rotate the patient instead of rotating the beam around the patient. So with that rotation, of course, comes the degree of freedom that we could, shoot proton beam from different angles to treat this patient. And we can raise and lower the chair to go from different levels of anatomy. Let's say we want to treat the head and neck area, then we would decrease the patient down into the floor. If we want to treat, let's say, pelvis area, then we would raise the patient up on the floor so that the fixed beam, which you can see that cyclotron is at the constant level, we just move the patient up and down and rotate it to give that degree of freedom. So this is kind of an elegant solution that is kind of evolving now and has, of course, adoption rate, very high adoption rate. Last time I counted, there are 12 proton centers now being built in the United States, and 8 of them have upright, this type of compact elements. So that's more than half. So if the adoption rate continue like this, we could soon see, this type of system could be as many as the existing system, maybe at some point surpass. We don't know. It depends on the success of our system and the systems that's installed, right? So the construction time from groundbreaking to construction go live time could be very short. In our case, we broke the ground in September 2024, and a year later, the installation was complete. And now we are kind of commissioning it. So perhaps 1 year to 1.5 years, you could, put the system in your clinic. And if you have a existing linear accelerator bunker, and because we had to do some construction, it could be even shorter. So this is actually very fast because, these systems are not easy to install, usually require multi-year projects and, a lot of efforts, right? So it's a game changer, definitely, this compactness. So this is how our department floor looks right now. You can see the proton unit is just in another bunker or another vault, equivalent to other technologies. So now our department is one of the most technologically advanced departments in the world with the introduction of the proton therapy. So we were lacking this. Now we have all the toys. We have linear accelerator, we have a PET LINAC, we have MRI LINAC, conventional LINAC, CyberKnife, which can do brain radiosurgery, and now proton therapy. So this is amazing. All right. So if you notice, I kind of started with what I'm doing now in my, faculty position. So I'm now going in a reverse order of what my clinical and research interests are. So here's a kind of a glimpse of my research interests during my residency years. I'll divide this into 3 majors. First is the characterization of a flash beam. What I mean by flash is normally we deliver radiation in the orders of minutes, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, something like this. So that's the beam time, right? When we say flash, it's like really fast in the order of milliseconds. So, of course, characterization of this type of fast beam is difficult. We don't have, a good detectors to do that. That was kind of my first project. The second was the investigation of a pixelated hybrid semiconductor detector. People in the proton world, of course, will understand, that the counting protons with this type of detector is possible. You can characterize many things, looking at the shape, looking at the linear energy transfer, and so on. And the third was applications of deep learning in the proton therapy. Of course, each of this could be a lecture of its own. So I'm not going to spend much time understanding that, the given time to me is limited. And during my PhD years, I investigated something called spatial fractionated radiotherapy. And in this technique, in most of the cases, the broad beam is collimated into a small beams or beamlets, if you will. So their names of microbeams or mini beams. It depends really on the size of how small these beams are. If they're in a micro scale, they call it microbeams. If they're in a millimeter or like a little bit less than a millimeter scale, they call it mini beams, right? So what's the basis for using this type of small and spatially fractionated radiation beams, right? Normally we want a broad beam, go into the patient and treat it, right? But we are here proposing a very, very small, tiny beamlets, right, to achieve higher normal tissue sparing. So there is something called a dose volume effect, and it's the idea that sets forth the knowledge that normal tissue can tolerate higher and higher doses when the beam size gets smaller and smaller. So let me try to explain this, with some kind of analogy, right? Because it might be head spinning. So let's say on the top right, you can see a broad beam. So that's a big beam, right? And it's type of beam that you can see before the collimation, right? Just below that, you can see there's a beamlet, which is kind of a collimation, so result of the collimation. So both of these beams, actually, you can use them to kill the cancer. But the way the tissue responds to each of these is a little bit different. So a little bit of analogy will help us probably better understand. Think of a broad beam as a nail, and think of a mini beam as a needle, right? So the wound created by needle will heal and repair faster, even if you have multiple wounds created by a very many needles, right? So this is kind of a biological effect, and we question if there is such an effect, with the radiation. And then there is a lot of mice studies, and some human studies floating out there that show this effect, right? So this is what I did during my PhD time. I think, I'm out of time allocated to me. To conclude, I try to introduce myself and also the field of medical physics, and hoping this is helpful to physicists out there. Please connect, and be happy to provide more information. Hope this is helpful, and happy to answer questions if any.
Serdar, can you hear me? So I will stop sharing, and we will go to the Q&A session. So participants.
You want me to stop sharing? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Here we go. So first of all, Serdar, really appreciate your time. So I very much understand your busy clinical schedule and taking time preparing everything starting from warm up and all of these techniques that you have and what kind of research you're doing there. I think it's an amazing opportunity for our community here to see firsthand and what kind of research you're actually doing, and maybe as an option apply as for the internship or for the research position. Who knows? So, Serdar, we have several questions from our audience. So first, I will read some questions that sent it before, and later we will jump up to our audience question. We will have another 15 minutes of Q&A session. So first one is more technical and translational clinical research. It's more related to flash radiotherapy. So it's maybe a little bit different that you explained, but I think it's very close to your field. So our question is how close you are seeing the flash radiotherapy implemented in standard clinical workflows.
Yeah, so Slash is, in the stage of clinical trial, a few clinical trial right now. So it is not like anywhere in the clinic yet. So in my clinic personally, we don't have Flash, but I mean, no Flash treating patients, right? I mean, we have a lot of Flash experiments happening, and our machine is of course capable of delivering Flash, both our electron machine and a proton machine. But as far as the delivering it to patients, there was a couple trials in Cincinnati, but in Ohio, I believe, and then not here. And main reason being is, usually the flash fields are limited. We can deliver small fields. So, how useful is that to treat, let's say, big target, usually associated with the human tumors, right? So those small fields, we are treating some mice. And the second thing is the QA of that is not easy yet. We don't have a good mechanism of image guidance and those regulation for now to make the translation immediate. So to answer your question, it's not in the clinic yet.
I see. I see. Thank you for describing about flash therapy. So next two questions pre-submitted. It's career and professional journey regarding your journey. So I think it's very fascinating having your background from to university in medical physics and later transitioning. So what's motivated you transitioning from PhD training at Georgia Tech to clinical residency at Emory? What skills are most critical in transition to a faculty position at Stanford? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'll start a little bit with the undergrad because the preparation for this a profession starts from the undergrad because you need to have some physics courses around your belt to go into this type of graduate program. And I took a course called health physics, during the undergrad, and I actually took a lot of biology courses as well. Just had some affinity to biology and the general anatomy. So then once taking those health physics classes, I realized that there is a field of medical physics, right? So I started doing research and I kind of blindly applied to many of them because at that time I didn't know this is a professional field, right? So someone coming from Central Asia, not knowing a lot about advanced radiotherapy deliveries, I thought, it combines my physics knowledge with the biology. So I think this is interesting. So once I started the program, my advisor kind of called me and said, hey, this is a professional field and you need to pass board exams if you want to practice, right? And at that point is when I learned that you have to have when I was in the graduate program. So basically, I just went there and my professor just outlined, hey, this is kind of the path you have to take if you want to be ABR board certified. And I was one of the unlucky people because in the 2012, 2013 era, the medical physics introduced residency. Before that, the training was done, during the job. So you just enter a job, first few years you get a training and then you can start practicing. You still have to take board exam, but there's no residency. Residency means it's a bottleneck because anyone who doing MD degree in the United States will understand that this residency interviews, you have to go match, it's a kind of competitive-ish, at the time. So there were a lot of applicants. We were rotating in the United States and it's like another addition of few years to your life. Yeah. So, if you want to transition, of course, let's say you have to enter a CAMPEP accredited degree, right? If you want to do clinical work. And once you finish that CAMPEP accredited degree, I don't think anyone will have problem because, if you did undergraduate physics, then CAMPEP physics degree is okay PhD degree to finish, right? You just need a good project. I guess the difficulty is to transition from a graduate program to residency. It's because you have to go and interview and match. And they're looking at a lot of things, they're asking a lot of this type of behavioral questions. They want to know that you are safe, you are good, you can be a good clinician in the future, right? And they can assess your technical knowledge as well, the things that you learned in the graduate school. If you are let's say have some tendency to do academic work, right? Of course, they will ask and will be interested in a lot about your research. So in almost all of my residency interviews, I was asked to give at least 5 to 10 minutes kind of a talk about my PhD thesis. So this type of things, but mainly is that, you are a good communicator, your stuff well, you know your main core knowledge well, and you are safe, to be around and, just a general pleasant person. So, not much of a, really you have to do this to become matching for residency. There are many residencies, they will select you and you are a candidate and you will select the residency. And then there's this algorithm that kind of matches you. It's kind of a marriage program type of algorithm. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Serdar, for sharing that. Yeah, American residency is another story. And definitely Emory and Georgia Tech is one of the strongest universities in research institution in the United States. I think it's a supervisor as well. Yeah, this connection with your supervisor and he also pushing it to other people in order to support you. I think it's very important, and also in other
I
factors.
guess, the fact that I did my PhD at Georgia Tech and Emory University just across the street, right?
Yeah.
So I had to do a lot of experiments at Emory University, and then I get to know a lot of faculty from there. So kind of have some knowledge of them, and they know me, so that I guess make it, easier to match with them with Emory University. Yeah.
Thanks, Serdar. And last question, and after that we will jump to audience, a few questions. So, Serdar, it's okay. It's a Stanford, yeah. It's a unique research environment. And how was this research environment at Stanford influence the direction of your work compared to your previous training in Georgia Tech and Emory? How does the proximity to Silicon Valley actually impact innovation in medical physics and radiology and oncology? What do you think about that? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, the Silicon Valley here is like a land of opportunity type of thing, for tech people and for academicians like me, especially the name of the Stanford. So definitely when I can come here, this is an expensive place to live, actually. But, people come here for opportunities, and the name of Stanford is big, and you realize it once you are here, actually, because, you will see, I mean, you are in medical school, but you are surrounded by this like a leading research institution, and cross-departmental collaboration is amazing here. People want to come talk to you, work with you. There are a lot of students here, very smart, bright, and a lot of opportunities for like also be involved with the tech world, right? I mean, I have done a lot of projects like with the people in the tech world, and just come to me. We can develop something as long as it has some medical application, right? So that like anything that we can help to treat our cancer patients. So it could be developing hardware, developing software, developing AI model, and so on. Really, really multifaceted. So in that sense, it's a very big opportunity to be at Stanford. I mean, I don't know. I think the value of that is unseen value of that addition is I'm probably underestimating. Yeah.
Thanks, Serdar. Appreciate it. Yeah, well, now we will go to audience question. We finished submitted questions, so 3-4 questions. So here's another medical doctor from Kazakhstan. So Walikhan, please go ahead, unmute yourself and ask your question. So meanwhile, we can ask Amir from ETH Zurich joining. Amir, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Amir, Amir, go ahead. We can hear you.
Thank you first of all for the talk. So last semester I did my project in a related field. I was working on nanoparticle radio enhancers for radiotherapy, and I just wanted to know your opinion on that. Like, do you think that like this type of treatment has a future? If so, what needs to be done for it to be implemented clinically and like on a larger scale?
Yeah, before I answer that, because both of these questions actually are more of a targeted therapy, radiopharmaceutical, this type of. I would like to ask, what was that project about that nanoparticle radio enhancer, and then maybe I can speculate on something.
So I did it more from the materials science point of view. So we use different compositions of oxide nanoparticles, but we didn't do like the in vivo or in vitro studies. We just used DCF dye to assess the amount of reactive oxygen species that are produced in the reaction, and then from that we calculated the radio enhancement compared to the samples without the nanoparticles injected.
Yeah, I think I'll answer this broadly, both of these questions, because in radiotherapy, you are treating something. Sometimes you have a ability to see that, and sometimes you don't have ability to see it, right? So we have something called image guidance. So any agent, be it radiopharmaceutical or nanoparticles, that allows us to improve that image guidance, I think have a good chance of making it to clinic. And the second thing is the tumor itself, so anything that makes that tumor cells more, I would say, less radio, because some tumors are radio resistant. So, that's why we try to escalate the dose, or that's why we try to do something called fractionation, right? We don't give all the dose one day. So, we try to make the radiobiology. So anything that can improve the radiobiology of the normal cells and tumor, what I mean by improve is that, make them potent to radiation, can make it clinically. Unfortunately, I'm not in the fields of theranostics, and maybe anything I will say has no more meaning than yours.
Amir, thank you for question.
Thank you.
Yeah, really appreciate. So we will have last 5 minutes. So very quick answers. Let's go. So we have Aisha and Amina. I guess they are medical doctors and also really working in your field. So please, Aisha, can you unmute yourself and ask a question? So last 3 questions.
Hello. Thank you very much for such an interesting presentation and inspiring speech, to be honest. Right now, I have the training in the medical physics, especially in the proton radiography field. So I'm doing my PhD. That's why I'm quite curious at the Stanford experience. And I know that you recently opened the PT Center, and but I'm quite curious, like, it's a novel approach to treat patients upright, vertically. And I also know that the proton therapy, it's a golden standard for pediatric cases, especially for children under anesthesia. And how are you gonna treat patients under anesthesia or CSI cases?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, historically, like not like now, the gold standard is, you are right. We are treating them supine, right? And the proton center so far, treating them supine, and of course, going from supine to upright is a challenge for pediatrics. And of course, this is one of our main pain points, and a lot of research right now we are doing to enable this, right? I mean, we have this system; it's upright. We have no choice, we will have to treat them upright, right? So now we need to think outside the box, how we're going to do that. So the main thing is this, there are 3 types of patients. One patient that will not cooperate, like very young patients, right? So we need to anesthetize them. The second patient is kind of semi-cooperative. So, they will not stay still, but they may also stay still. So our aim is to distract them. And the third is patients who are cooperative. You say stay still, they will stay still, right? So like on the older spectrum of those patients. So the young patients, we are developing this immobilization where we will anesthetize them in the supine position, immobilize them in that position, and move them to upright position. Now, the validation of that is, of course, pending, because we are not treating it yet, but we have some understanding, we have some idea of, be able to do that. And our anesthesiology team here is very strong. I mean, there are cases that they've put forward. They said, there are scenarios where we anesthetize patients upright or semi-upright. So, if it comes to that, they will try to do that. But it's not easy, to anesthetize them in the upright position. Intubation and everything is very difficult. So we'll try to anesthetize them and immobilize them in supine, and we'll develop a kind of reclining chair, almost like a car seat type of thing that can go from supine to upright in a matter of like a click of a button type of thing. And then once they're immobilized, the hopes are they don't move, right? Of course, again, that's pending validation. And once they don't move, then we can try to, treat that CSI. The other thing is, of course, because it's a not supine treatment, right? It will have to move up and down instead of horizontally, because of the limitation of the field size. So we'll see, how that goes. But we have some roadmap, almost clear roadmap of how we're going to do that. It is a challenge for sure. And by the way, there is an upright proton facility that's not as ultra compact as our system in Israel, and they have achieved upright craniospinal irradiation and published about this. So we are quite confident that this can be done.
Aisha, thank you for your question. Next one, Amina. Amina, please go ahead with your question. Last 2 questions, and we are good with timing. Last 5 minutes. Amina, can you unmute yourself and ask your question? Then let's proceed to Wali Khan. Wali Khan, is it good? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question about the procedures working with radiopharmaceuticals and regulations in laboratory. How are they regulated, especially when it's work with linear accelerator in laboratory?
So I will reiterate your question and see if I can understand, right? So you're asking about regulation of radiopharmaceutical in our clinic?
In laboratory experiments.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know how to answer this question. Unfortunately, I don't deal with too much radiopharmaceuticals. So in terms of their regulation, administration, storage, this type of thing, I mean, I have some idea because they are radiation agents, right? But I don't have a good understanding of how they are regulated. It's more like of a new thing for us. I mean, as a Stanford, we don't have we just initiated a theranostics modality, so we are also thinking about this. But the people who do that, of course, exist. But I don't have a very good answer for you.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you for your question. So we have a last one. So Amina is asking, what's the biggest limitation of proton therapy to the people outside of physics underestimate, and how do you and your colleagues validate the dose accuracy in the heterogeneous tissue like lung or near bone air interfaces? Thank you.
Yeah, this is a good question. The issue is, of course, this type of heterogeneity is a problem, first of all, for proton, because, we need to, every time you image a patient, right, you have a grayscale image and gives you CT numbers. And then those CT numbers, you need to know what is that exactly for proton therapy. So is it a tissue? Is it a bone? Is it air? And so on, right? So we need to assign density and material information to that. And the way we do this currently is we kind of do some kind of a empirical type of almost conversion. What we call is convert those AQ numbers from the CT to stopping power, and that of course has some uncertainties. And we kind of bake that into our radiation planning, where we say, when we shoot the proton, let's say it goes 150 millimeters, right? It doesn't go 150 millimeters. It always has this 3.5 to 4% of that range difference, right? So let's say, if you go 10 cm or 100 millimeters, you always have like this 3.5, 4 millimeter uncertainty. So we bake that in there, and the more complicated the tissue is, like it has many interfaces, then the worse it gets. So how do we validate this? Before we start treating, we usually, characterize our CT and then we shoot protons through it. Let's say we can get some like a material that's bone-like or tissue-like, and we shoot protons through it, and we do the measurements of the range and make sure that this is correct. And sometimes, and I also, do that, we buy some tissue, from butcher. We go and buy some lungs, bones, kidneys, what have you, and then just CT them, put them in a container, and shoot the beam through them, plan and shoot the beam through them, and try to do the measurement. But in terms of putting a detector inside a patient, we can't do. We can right now just put behind the patient or on the patient to kind of understand at least a little bit. But this is one of the good research topics that's happening in the proton world, kind of validating the dose accuracy and range accuracy, in the patient. And most people do it like by using either prompt gamma, that's kind of where the the gammas are generated inside a patient when protons interact with them, or now there's the newer techniques where the protons are also thought, we can use them by shoot through. So we can shoot through protons. It's not using the best of the proton because protons is made to stop, and the main argument is that they stop. But now we can kind of, in the periphery of the target, use them for a shoot through, and those protons that are exiting can give us valuable information. Another thing is, if the proton imaging is online, and this is one of my research topics I didn't talk about, but if you image with the protons itself and not X-rays, you will of course have to have some proton exiting, right? That of course will deliver some dose. It's not a huge amount of dose comparable to the other imaging modalities. So then that protons that are exiting could be used to do this type of validation studies. But this is not mainstream clinical yet.
Thank you, Serdar, for explanation. So with that, I really appreciate, guys, your question. And Dr. Serdar Charyyev, thank you for your time. I think it's very important for this our young generation to share this research, and maybe some of them will be interested and one might be continue to this research. So with that, Global Central Asian Science and Technology Association want to thank everyone, especially thank Dr. Serdar Charyyev. So we are continue to bring in global expertise, fostering collaboration in advancing science and innovation in Central Asian region by inviting very established scholars. So if you're interested, have specific questions, please contact to Serdar directly. And I think Serdar really came here and shared with the Central Asian community, scientific community. If you're interested in this field, and you can just rewatch his talk and just contact to him. Serdar, if you want to add something, please go ahead. If not, I will close the session.
Yeah, this is good. Just reach out, any physicists out there or, anyone who's interested in this type of field, reach out. We are not a big community, I go to all the conferences. The Central Asian community is not big. I know maybe one or two persons, outside me. So, the representation is kind of low. And we are really good at physics and math, so I'm very surprised. And overall, this career is kind of rewarding because you are helping patients and has a good work-life balance. So I think it could be a career option for many of the community. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Serdar. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
that was amazing.
Yeah,
amazing
yeah.
meeting. Thanks, guys. So.